Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon and good evening to those of you joining us from further afield online. Welcome to USIP. My name is Lucy Kurtzer-Ellenbogen. I direct our Institute's program on Israel, the Palestinian territories, and the region, and it's truly my pleasure to welcome you here today, and also for us to be able to bring you this important conversation on the game-changing potential of water in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and indeed beyond more broadly in the Middle East. We have three truly exemplary speakers to talk us through this subject today. Yana Abu Talib, Nada Majdalani, and Gidon Bromberg, who respectively are the Jordanian, Palestinian, and Israeli co-directors of EcoPeace Middle East. EcoPeace is an organization that brings Jordanians, Palestinians, and Israelis together to cooperate around shared solutions to environmental challenges that don't respect borders or politics, as we well know. EcoPeace was, I should note, recently awarded a MEPA, Middle East Partnership for Peace Act grant administered by USAID, enabling their ongoing work addressing war security in the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel using dual-track scientific and grassroots approaches. I think it's really fitting that we're having this conversation today. It's notable we're a week out from the White House releasing its national security strategy, where it named climate change as an existential shared global problem and called for global cooperation around such challenges. We're also, I think, about 2 weeks out from the UN's COP27 climate change conflict, which is going to bring leaders from around the world together to discuss these shared challenges in Gidon, Nada's, and Yana's neighboring Egypt. We are also a week out of seeing the signing of a maritime boundary agreement between Israel and Lebanon, and perhaps that's something we can get into as well in terms of what that says about clean energy reserves and the potential for broader regional movement in this regard. In the most water-scarce region in the world, where the collision of climate and conflict conspire towards potential catastrophe, Gidon, Nada, and Yana work every day to change that paradigm so that a shared problem can open the door to mutual benefit, confidence building, and perhaps conflict mitigation momentum. And so while 90 minutes is really too short a time to do comprehensive justice to all that we could discuss today, I have great confidence that with the speakers we have, we can get pretty close. So what I'd like to do is dive into a conversation among us up here. We will then open to questions from our online and in-person audience, and we're looking forward to the discussion. Yana, I'd like to ask you to start us off. If you could describe EcoPeace's approach, essentially the what, how, and why of the work that you do, how you operate, and the challenges surrounding water in your region.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much, Lucy, and a special thank you to the entire USIP team for hosting us. It's such a pleasure to be here and once again talk about our work and gain more support that is needed for our work, especially in a region like ours that is torn with conflict, but also now with the climate change disaster that we're seeing affecting every resource in our region. So I'd like to always begin describing EcoPeace by saying we're a unique trilateral environmental peace-building organization with one objective: to really bring together Jordanian, Israelis, and Palestinians to protect our shared environment and to achieve sustainable development and a fair share of equitable sharing of our limited resources between our people and between people and nature. How do we do this as a group of having offices in the three countries? We work in two ways. We work with a top-down approach, meaning we aim at policy change, trying to work with the governments of our regions, with the authorities of each of our countries that are responsible for the different sectors we focus on, the water, energy, and food, because we're always working on creating that nexus between water, energy, and food. So, but how do we change policy? So we work with our respective authorities by preparing the necessary research and data to be able to influence policy change. The second approach that we work with is our grassroots, us being a grassroots organization, meaning we exist in communities around our shared resources, especially in the Jordan River, which is a lower part of the Jordan River, which is shared between Jordan, Israel, Palestine. But we also have bilateral work between Israeli and Palestinian communities, focusing on the mountain aquifer and the coastal aquifer shared between Gaza and Israel. So we're there in communities, trying to build constituencies in those communities. We work with different stakeholders in those communities, the municipalities, different people in the communities, from farmers in the rural areas, all the way to private sector, but also educators. We empower them with the necessary information that they need to put pressure on their decision makers, and then to make effect on the centralized authorities in our different capitals in the 3 countries. And making that linkage between the people on ground and the policymakers is important and enabled us to achieve lots of on-ground implementation of the needed projects.
Thank you. And I know we're going to talk more about some of these concrete projects a little later in the conversation. If I can turn to you, Nader, I know you all, when you talk about your work, you often discuss this concept of healthy interdependencies. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that, what you mean by that, what that looks like, and why this particular area, the Israeli, Jordanian, Palestinian, is sort of ripe and fertile for that kind of cooperation, to your minds.
Indeed, when we discuss healthy interdependencies, it means that we recognize clearly the interconnectedness of our environment and natural resources. We look at ourselves as one set, as people who are in the same boat, sharing natural resources, sharing environmental concerns, and these natural resources, especially water, are very limited in our region, considering that it's one of the most arid regions in the world. Political borders in that context do not exist. Political borders will not recognize climate change and will not recognize pollution. And I've come across this concept when I was very little, when I was a teenager, during the Oslo Accords, when I was put to understand the concept of environment knows no boundaries. And this was exactly the type of work that we are still doing today as EcoPeace with our youth, to understand that we are dependent on each other to survive and to protect our shared environmental heritage. And this happens on several layers of interaction. And as Diana mentioned, it starts with interdependencies, emphasizing interdependencies at the educational level and communication with our constituencies and raising their awareness. But it also comes into different other practices that we bring on board through our Green-Blue Deal, in terms of bringing out-of-the-box ideas. For example, we are working on one specific aspect of our Green-Blue Deal for the Middle East, which is exchanging water and renewable energy between Palestine and Israel and Jordan. And the concept is based on creating healthy interdependencies that would create stability and water and energy security for all in light of climate change. And this creates somehow an understanding that we all need to provide something, and in return, everyone has a shared responsibility to implement projects on ground that would make sure that we have appropriate climate adaptation and mitigation measures. And our concept of exchanging water and energy, where Jordan has the vast majorities of land to produce solar energy, that is enough to produce 20% of almost the demand of the three countries for energy supply. In exchange, on the Palestinian and Israeli side, we have the Mediterranean Sea, which can be utilized for desalination. And here we can exchange those two resources where they're much needed for Palestinians and Israelis and Jordanians, to have the equitable amounts of water that are needed. For Israel is to increase its energy supply from clean sources and to meet the Paris Agreement targets. And here we create win-win situations, which are very much necessary to accommodate ourselves to what comes next in terms of climate impact. And as I mentioned, we are all in the same boat. And I always use the metaphor of the Titanic. It doesn't matter who is advanced in technology and adaptation measures and whose system is so fragile, because at the same time, when we are so interconnected geographically and environmentally and resource-wise, the Titanic will sink anyways if the iceberg hits, whether you're on the luxury first class or in the bottom of the ship. Everyone will sink if we don't cooperate to, drift together in the lifeboats.
Or steer away from the iceberg.
Or steer away from the iceberg. So here's our concept that requires, again, a lot of education on interdependency on ground, but as well on the level of bringing out there concepts that would push really our leadership to understand that we need to work together.
Thank you. I mean, as you've noted, this concept that these challenges and these crises don't respect borders or politics, of course, I'm quite sure, and as we know, those borders and politics do tend to get in the way. And you referenced when you were younger and the Oslo Accords, and I wanted to circle back to some of what you've mentioned later in the conversation, but pick up on the Oslo Accords and turn to you, Gidon, because we are, I think September marks the 30th anniversary since the signing of those accords, and which held out the promise and potential of an unrealized, to this day, two-state solution, but also were notable, among other things, for codifying water as a sort of core issue of the conflict to also be resolved. And I think that recognizing the importance of water in the context of peace was important, but I know you've discussed before the concept also that also held water hostage to the resolution of the conflict. Has anything changed? I know there are factors you often point to about how that paradigm of zero-sum around water has changed. What are the factors that now make a different way of thinking about this possible?
So also let me thank you, Lucy, and the whole team of USIP for this invitation. When the Oslo Accords were negotiated in 94, 95, water was only natural water. Water was very much a scarce and finite resource. There was the shared groundwater of the coastal aquifer between Israel and Gaza, the shared groundwater between Israel and the West Bank, the Jordan River system, and the Dead Sea shared with Israel, Palestine, and Jordan. And therefore solving water issues, particularly between Israelis and Palestinians, was difficult because it was a zero-sum game. It was very clear more water must be transferred to the Palestinian side as part of an agreement, but the transfer of that water when there's a limited sort of tub produces winners and losers. And therefore water was put aside, was recognized as critically important, but difficult to solve. And therefore, together with other difficult issues, Jerusalem, refugees, and so forth, the idea was that within 5 years, a deal would be struck. And from our conversations with the negotiators at the time, perhaps the idea was that Israel would be so-called generous on water, and Palestine would be so-called generous on refugees, and a deal would be struck in that way. Well, the rationale as to why water was difficult to solve 30 years later doesn't exist anymore. And that's largely due to Israeli leadership in the water sector, both in desalination, where today 70% of the water that Israelis drink is no longer coming from natural water sources. 70% is coming from desalination, and it's projected it will increase to over 90% in the short term. And in addition to that, Israel's the world leader in treating sewage and then reusing it for agriculture. That's more water today being produced by recognizing that sewage is a resource than the quantity of water that Israel ever had extracted from the Sea of Galilee. So the water pie has tremendously increased, yet on the ground, when it comes to the fair share of water between Israelis and Palestinians, there's been no movement. And one of our concerns is that policymakers in our own region, but also internationally, seem to be fixated on the principle of we must agree, we must solve all 5 final status issues together, or we don't move forward on anything. Of course, all of us would have loved to see movement on all 5 final status issues yesterday, but 30 years down the track, what we've identified at EcoPeace is, in fact, we're holding this zero-sum game, this all-or-nothing approach is in fact holding water issues hostage. What does that mean? It means that there remains intermittent water supply throughout the West Bank and Gaza when there doesn't need to be. We can today, much due to Israel's leadership on the one hand, on expanding the water pie, Palestinians, we can negotiate and Palestinians can get a fairer share of the natural water with no reduction in water available to Israelis because we can increase desalination, we are continuing to do that and to treat sewage so that we no longer have a lose-win situation. We can advance on a win-win situation. And today, more than ever, that's critical because that's a way to improve the situation on the ground for every Palestinian and equally for every Israeli, because there are sanitation issues between Israelis and Palestinians that are not being dealt with properly. And both Palestinians and Israelis suffer from raw sewage flowing down almost every shared stream. So there's another deal, a much more pertinent deal, certainly with the climate crisis, because when we put ourselves in the context that the climate crisis is further declining the amount of natural water that we have, that's what the Palestinians have access to. That's actually in further decline. So that we have the opportunity, and that's the call of EcoPeace, to move forward. We sort of call it water first, not because we want to prevent all of the other critical issues from moving forward, but by moving water issues forward now, we can improve the reality on the ground, more water in every Palestinian home, sewage being treated not only for Israelis but also for Palestinians, build trust, show that we can move forward. reach an agreement on a critical final status issues, highlight that we have a partner for peace.
So in other words, it has a dual purpose. One is improving access to water, which is necessary, but you see it also as having the potential to grease the wheels or provide some momentum towards progress on other tracks, perhaps, given the trust deficit that exists between the leaders right now.
And identifying the urgency. Because perhaps all of us, perhaps many of the decision makers, we don't, but many of the decision makers don't see the urgency in moving forward on the peace process. Mm-hmm. On the climate crisis, we failed to move forward on these issues. It's to the detriment of all three of us, and as Nada's metaphor highlights, it's exactly why we're on the Titanic together. Yeah. Failing to move forward on water mitigation issues is a lose-lose now, right, to all three peoples.
Yeah. And if I may just add, Lucy, but it's also a national security issue. So water is a very important resource for each of our countries, and it's seen by each of our countries as a national security issue. What good is a neighbor that is not secure in its water resources? So that's more the reason that we really need to be working on solving especially water issues.
Yeah, no, and it's an important point, as I mentioned at the top. It's interesting that this certainly climate environment challenges appeared in the US national security strategy that was released last week by the administration. So this is a language we're increasingly hearing being used around the issues. If I can, you mentioned, Gidon, you talked about untreated sewage and the challenges, and again, the lose-lose that you see when these issues aren't addressed, and the win-win possibilities. I always find stories tend to be the most effective way to underscore what this looks like in reality. And for me, one of the most powerful stories that really brought home to me the impact and potential of what you all do was it was a Reuters story, or a headline also that appeared in Times of Israel back in June of this past year, about the sea in Gaza being swimmable in again for the first time in a while. Could you actually, Nadia, if I could ask you to talk about what that story referred to, and how that came about, how you identified that challenge, and what leading towards the solution looked like?
Again, this really exemplifies our interdependency and interconnectedness in terms of our resources. The Gaza story is really compelling, and it shows that our way of doing things can really be effective to change course of lives and to change course of how things need to be done and understood. For several years, and because of the 15, 16 years of blockade on Gaza and borders, and there's this dual-use material that the Israeli military has identified as dangerous material to enter Gaza, as not to be used for constructing tunnels or utilized for making non-conventional weapons, etc. This was also an excuse to not enter several kinds of material that are necessary for building wastewater treatment plants and water facilities in Gaza Strip. And one of the major projects that has been impeded for a long time, for nearly 12, 13 years, was a World Bank project in the north of Gaza, which is a major wastewater treatment plant to serve several communities. This is nearly around the border, and sewage was literally for many years put into the Mediterranean Sea untreated, and the currents take it north, polluting the beaches in Israel, and causing the closure of major desalination plants. And one of them is the Ashkelon desalination plant in Israel, which literally provides around 70% of the
Ashkelon 15%.
Ashkelon 15% of the water of drinking water to Israeli people in the area. So And we came to this information all by coincidence because we were looking for polio in the we were taking samples from the beaches in Israel to detect polio. And by coincidence, the same laboratory that we were testing in told us that they have been testing for fecal coliform and other pollutants in the Mediterranean for Ashkelon, and it has been closed several times and threatening the water security of Israel by stopping operation. So what does this tell us? That at that point, the Israeli military decision was similar to shooting themselves in the foot, because the conventional security meaning has nothing to do with what the environment has to deal with things and how environment understands its natural way of doing things. What we did was we've mobilized people on ground through the office of Tel Aviv, around the communities of Gaza. They've signed a letter addressing the prime minister, back then Netanyahu, to take action that whatever is called the Iron Dome, any protective conventional security measures are not effective because it is turning back around into also affecting Israel's water security, and by lots of also advocacy on the policy-making level, we started seeing some relaxation to enter material for water and sanitation construction in Gaza. And since 2018 until today, around 3 major wastewater treatment plants in Gaza Strip have been completed and constructed. So this is the way forward. It takes a lot of work on several layers to build the understanding that whatever goes around comes around, and that we need to really think of the repercussions of our decisions if we don't work together and facilitate things that would impact our lives collectively.
I would add that military security is a legitimate concern, but military security is not the only security. And that's what EcoPeace was really able to successfully communicate, first and foremost, to the Israeli residents around Gaza and of course to the decision makers, that water security and environment security and health security, they're also legitimate concerns, and decision makers have to balance. We can't keep our head in the sand. There's broader human security, and when we understand human security, then we understand we're in the same boat. And that's really what led to those policy changes, and perhaps the first good news to come out of Gaza in a decade around water. That's the power of water.
Because the beach became, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and to add to this point and to what Jana mentioned, that water is actually a national security matter, is that if it's not something that we say, it's something that has internationally been recognized. It has been put into literature by several international security agencies and military agencies, by NATO, by CIA. The experience of the refugees of Syria flooding into Europe, this is one major issue that has come out of water scarcity and not managing well with climate change issues. So it now is globally recognized, this interconnectedness between security and water security. And most of the non-secure violence breakouts in the world are also recognized as water scarce areas in the world, and this is typically the MENA region. So that's why we need to start also recognizing this issue, and quoting here also our water minister at one of the donors meetings in Brussels. He mentioned that if we don't solve water problems in Gaza today for 2 million people, Europe will start seeing floodings of refugees from Gaza to Cyprus and Europe very soon. And the history will repeat itself, such as the stories of Syria, refugees, etc.
Yeah, can you, Nada and Yana in particular, you've talked about the way eco-peace works top down, and this was an example as well, very much engaging policymakers around this, but also bottom up. Could you say in relation to whether it's this example or others, a little bit about what that bottom-up component looks like? There's obviously policy change that has to happen, but presumably around these issues as well, there's an education component, a public education component about use of water and effectively dealing with your natural environment. What does that work look like, either in this particular example or more broadly? Yana, I don't know if I can ask you to start, but please any of you weigh in.
Oh, definitely. So education is very important, and working as with the local communities and educating them about the challenges, the water realities is important. But it's more effective the way we do it at EcoPeace. When we're working with the local communities and the people in the local communities, we have them become part of identifying those challenges. Mm-hmm. So we literally, for example, when we're doing a project on the Jordanian side of the Jordan Valley, we take people to the sites to see with their own eyes what the challenges are, so that they could become part of identifying the challenges. But then we work heavily with them on educating them and having them part of doing the research so that they're part of identifying the solution as well. Only then they're able to really discuss and present the problem and the solutions to the decision maker. And for a concrete example, when we first started working on the Jordanian side, with the Jordanian, different stakeholders, the farmers, the educators, the municipalities, the mayors in the municipalities, and we were talking about the Jordan River and the pollution in the Jordan River. Everyone was just telling us, why are you talking to us about this? We Jordanians don't have a say, or we're not taking any of the water from the Jordan River, and we're not polluting the river. But by taking them on site visits to see the different realities in the communities when it comes to treatment and of the sewage in the communities, they were able to see with their own eyes that it's not only Israel to blame, but it's us that are contributing to the pollution of the river, because we do not have sanitation solution. People in the Jordan Valley, on the Jordanian side, are dependent on cesspits, and they're poor people in the communities there. So they're either unable to pump the sewage, the cesspits, or they're old and cracked, so they seep into the groundwater, also polluting our groundwater. But they were able to see that with their own eyes, which made all the difference. And for them to understand and go to their mayors and say, these are the things that we demand from you. We need you to go to our central government, to the responsible authorities, to really create solutions for sanitation in the Jordan Valley.
It's a very powerful example of watching how that sort of top down and bottom up meet each other and connect with each other. And I think that staying on the Jordan River Valley, I know that's an area that you've worked on for a long time, and with mayors, as you've just mentioned, as part of that, your Good Water Neighbors project. But one of the things I've always found compelling, you've pointed out often that the Jordan River Valley, it's important geographically, environmentally. It's also an important place in terms of shared cultural and religious significance for many people. Why is it that you talk about that? What does that look like in terms of integrating that concept into your work?
So the Jordan River is a holy river to the three Abrahamic traditions, to Christians, to Muslims, and to Jews. Yet we, the Abrahamic people, those of you that haven't seen the Jordan south of the Sea of Galilee, you'd be shocked as to what you would see today. 95% of the fresh water has been diverted. What's left is mostly sewerage, mostly untreated, agricultural runoff, saline water. A very unholy combination that actually threatens people's health if they're baptized in the river today. So that is unacceptable, and Ecopeace has been focusing for most of our near 3 decades of work to rehabilitate the river, and by, as Jana said, by bringing local communities, local residents. Why do we have to bring local residents down to the river? Because the river is the border. There are checkpoints, there are fences, it's mined. People generally do not come to the border. They're fearful of the border. And therefore the demise of the river is out of sight, out of mind. So our programming in the Good Water Neighbours brings the communities on the Israeli side, on the Jordanian side, on the Palestinian side, to look at that demise of the river, to understand, as Jana said, that we all have a responsibility here. Not the same responsibility, but we all have something. We can continue blaming and only blaming, or we can start to take some responsibility for the actions that we're responsible for. And a key aspect of that is the faith-based communities. And we were able to bring priests and imams and rabbis from our own communities, and then later from the broader international community, to speak out, to, first of all, to see the demise, and it's mind-boggling. We invite you all to come down with us to the Jordan Valley. And then, the faith-based leadership have actually signed onto a covenant together, calling for the rehabilitation of the river. A critical aspect is the mayors. My favorite photo is the mayors of the Jordan River, Palestinian, Jordanian, and Israeli. It's not a pretty sight. There are some big bellies. They're in their trunks, and they're jumping into a clean stretch of the Jordan River together. They're making a splash. Now, they're doing that not because they're best friends. They're not. Animosity and conflict continues. I think this is the importance of what environmental peace building. We're here at USIP. This is not a development issue, and if you think that conflict resolution is only about building sanitation facilities or putting pipes, then you're missing the point. It's about understanding that we're in the same boat, that we can't clean up the river unless we all it's a shared river, for goodness sake. If we don't all get the sewage out, then we've actually done nothing. And perhaps, this just several months ago, to show how this type of work, faith-based work, community work, youth work, mayors, the government of Israel, this present government passed a cabinet decision that I think is truly historic. It's still only the first stretch, the first 11 kilometers of the river between the Sea of Galilee to the Yarmouk, which is the border with Jordan. There is now a cabinet decision to rehabilitate that stretch, remove all of the sewage. In fact, our work has already brought in about $100 million of investments, not our money. It's the money of the US government, of European governments. But those investments wouldn't have happened without the peace building. But now, with this new cabinet decision, 50 million cubic meters of water will start to flow down the Jordan River. But here's the catch. We don't rehabilitate the river without working all together. So the government of Israel will put the water back in a pipe 11 kilometers further down until we can really move forward on regional cooperation for the whole length of the river. And the cabinet decision calls for regional cooperation to rehabilitate the river. So we have an opportunity today, all of us have an opportunity today, because this is not our river. This is all of our rivers. This is the most important river in our mind, and I think in most people's mind. This is a river that belongs to us all. And by rehabilitating the river, we make such a powerful statement. So we ask you to join us in that effort to expand that cooperation for the full length of the Jordan River all the way down to the Dead Sea.
So, and you mentioned a couple of times in that answer regional cooperation, the need for that around that. And so I'd like to, if we can zoom out on that, and we have a couple of questions as well on that issue from our online audience. Specifically, in a couple of pieces you've touched on already, Jana and Nada. Nada, you referenced before the Water Energy Exchange Agreement of November 2021, I believe, between Israel and Jordan, facilitated by and funded by the UAE. And of course, that wouldn't have come about without the advent of the Abraham Accords. Now, I know that you've been working for years on this notion. You've mentioned it, Gidon, of water energy exchanges, ideally, ultimately, between Israel, Jordan, and Palestine. This agreement so far is Israel, Jordan, Emirati Involvement Agreement. Can you, maybe Jana, I'll ask you to start on that. What are some options for the future on that agreement? Where do you see the future of that, potential involvement, maybe of the Palestinians in that agreement down the line? And what more potential can be unlocked from this geopolitical development of the Abraham Accords and the Negev Forum in this space?
Well, thank you, Lucy. Very important question. I mean, definitely this letter of intent that was signed between the Jordanians and Israelis, facilitated by Emiratis and the US involvement as well, is an important first step. But it wasn't only triggered by or enabled by the signing of the Abraham Accords. It was enabled because of the urgency of climate change. Mm-hmm. And that's how we were able to move it forward as well, by putting together our Green-Blue Deal report and touching upon the 4 different components. One of them is the Green-Blue Deal, the Water Energy Nexus, which we produced a pre-feasibility study for back in 2015. But this is an important first step, like I said. Our vision as an organization is that all 3 countries cooperate on this, and that it would be a learning point for other countries in the region to join on cooperation on to be climate change resilience, basically. What we're focusing on at this time is also to show that this is an opening for the Palestinians as well. So something that we're trying to move forward is more solar energy in Area C for Palestinians to be wheeled to Gaza to operate the existing treatment plants, wastewater treatment plants, and the desalination plants that Nada was talking about. Mm-hmm. So this is something that hopefully is moving forward, and we'll be able to, with the support of the international community, to push forward for. But the way we work as an organization is that we look at pragmatic solutions. We look at what opportunities are there. So some of the recent concept notes that we're trying to push forward is that opportunity to include a mandate for the Mediterranean Gas Forum, that they would also focus on climate change and renewable energy. Another concept, building on what we see of signing of a letter of intent between the Israelis and Jordanians for exchange of renewable energy for water, is for Jordan to become a hub for producing solar cells, to enable Jordan to be able to, or manufacturing of solar cells, to be able to produce all the needed renewable energy in our region. but also looking at the Ukraine-Russia war and the need for gas and all the challenges that created, and thinking of climate change and the opportunities we have in our region. We're also looking at moving forward that our region could be a hub for producing renewable energy and green hydrogen as well, to be shared and between our region, first of all, but then also exported to Europe.
Very interesting. And if you could just say, why is Jordan such a prime candidate for playing this role when it comes to solar energy? If we could just talk about what makes that the case, geographically speaking.
Well, first of all, as Jordan, when we did our pre-feasibility study, it was proven by the research that we did that Jordan has vast areas of desert that are ecologically not significant and that can be used to produce all this renewable energy. But then, as Jordanian government, it's within our energy strategy to be increasing the mix of renewables as well in our production, and to also become a hub to export renewable energy to the nearby countries. So all those elements are enabling elements. In addition to that, we have a God gift of being, I think the best country in the area in terms of sun radiation. Okay. So we're able to produce a lot of solar energy.
I have another question from one of our viewers online. Bruce online is asking if one of you can speak to the sustainability of desalination and energy use, any secondary impacts or byproducts of that. So I don't know who would like to take that.
I'd be very happy to take that. So desalination should always be the last choice, not the first choice. We need to make sure that we manage the natural water resources that we have as best and efficiently as we can. That means that the price of water needs to be right. In a desert area where we live, water should be metered, water should not be free, water should reflect its scarcity. And that's sadly not always the case. We should be treating our wastewater and then reusing that. And when we get the price right for water, then a whole lot of technologies can be employed to even further increase efficiency. But what's happened to our part of the world is that we're doing most of that. Certainly Israel is a world leader when it comes to water efficiency today, perhaps the world leader. And there's now no other choice. So desalination should never be seen as something just to jump into. No, it's only when you've achieved everything else and you still don't have enough water resources, then desalination is an effective option, and that's what's happened in Israel. Yet, nevertheless, the energy needed for desalination is intensive, and that's why the water energy exchange, the purchase of renewables from Jordan, is so attractive, because it enables desalination to move forward without that footprint, without that print of increased emissions, because they'll be powered by renewable sources. One of the issues that still remain is the brine. It's those salts that are removed from the desalination process that are dumped into the Mediterranean. And why is that of concern? Because it's not just Israel and Palestine and Egypt and Lebanon. It's the whole Eastern Mediterranean that's run out of water, and everyone is planning to build very large desalination plants, and at the moment, everyone's going to dump that brine back into the Mediterranean. If we don't invest in new technologies of how to utilize that brine rather than dumping that brine into the Mediterranean, we'll turn the Eastern Mediterranean into a Dead Sea. Now, the exciting news is that there is technology being developed. There's technology to utilize the brine as an alternative to cement. There's technology potentially to use the brine as a carbon capture which further then advances us as regards to climate change. There's true cutting-edge technology. It requires further investment, but it does speak to the potential, the continued potential of desalination to move forward if we get the regulations in place and if the necessary funds for further research are put into place to diminish the negative environmental implications. We can't ignore those implications.
And same question as before that Jana was speaking to. Do you see any opportunities that have new opportunities in the space given the development of the Abraham Accords and a greater move towards regional cooperation? Are there new opportunities to your minds that have arisen here, or barriers, further barriers to that playing that role?
Lucy, can I just add to what Gidon was saying about desalination? So it's important to give the example of Jordan. With the water stress that we're facing in the country, we have no other alternative but to desalinate. And this is what we're doing as an organization, working with our local authorities on the Jordanian side to just make sure that the desalination is sustainable in that sense, because we can't afford as a country anymore to be looking at only one option of only to purchase the additional quantities from Israel. But what we'll be purchasing from Israel would be partly desalinated water on the Mediterranean. But also, we'll also need to implement on the Jordanian side our national water carrier, which means desalination as well. But what we're always stressing on to make it sustainable, as Gidon was saying, that we work with the authorities to make sure that we go into the proper reform that our water sector needs. And we take all the different measures, and then we look at what our demand in terms of water would be, and they would come from desalination.
To build on the question, we need to broaden the cooperation. There's no question. Our survival as a region is dependent on broadening the cooperation. The Green-Blue deal that Ecopeace launched from its very initial thinking was not only looking at Jordan, Palestine, and Israel. We understood that the Middle East as a whole, the potential of the Abraham Accords is extremely significant. But if it doesn't include the Palestinians, then we're missing the boat. All partners need to move forward together. Otherwise, we don't move forward. It continues to be a challenge that prevents progress on these critical issues. And the potential of the win-win is just so dramatic for us. We don't need to be the example to the rest of the world of tragedy and suffering and a failure to be sustainable. We can be the example of shared prosperity, of climate resilience. We can be the exporter of green technologies, of solar and wind power, to indeed, as Jana said, in a recent study, to power a third of the energy needs of Europe through renewable sources. But that's only when we work together. And the call for Ecopeace is that the decision makers that are moving forward this regional effort, we can't leave anyone behind. We have to be working with all three countries.
And just to add that and to steer the conversation a little bit beyond environment and a bit more political, there needs to be also an understanding that real peace and stability in the Middle East, for that to be achieved, peace between Palestinians and Israelis should be prioritized. Israel will never be secure and a secure state if there is no advancement on a political solution between the Palestinians and Israelis. And no matter how many Arab countries sign peace agreements and advance on cooperation agreements with the Israelis, it would not mean anything on the ground for every and each Israeli citizen in terms of security if peace between Palestinians and Israelis is achieved. And therefore, what needs to really be advanced is to go back and discuss how can we really advance the two-state solution and put it back as the one and only solution that is suitable for everyone, either Palestinians or Israelis on board. We can't really think of other alternatives which are more difficult. And the more the time is passing, the more there's time for settlements expansion and creating this Swiss cheese, as George Bush has once described in the West Bank, of disconnected communities, the more the two-state solution achievement will be difficult. Mm-hmm. So our work is to utilize and to somehow also maintain this notion that there is a real partner for peace to work on practical issues that Gida has mentioned, but also to take this forward on a longer-term vision to create peace between Israelis and Palestinians to achieve security for all.
Yeah, thank you, Nader, and thank you for bringing us to that topic in the conversation, because the next set of questions I have directed to you, and we have a couple of questions online about this as well, is if you could speak to, we've talked about the opportunities, but the challenges that you've just been able to speak to, and the challenges of doing this work in the Palestinian case under occupation, and the challenges to moving some of these issues forward. And perhaps relatedly, if Nader and any of you want to talk as well, we have a question from Josie online about whether it's possible to achieve water security and water sovereignty for Palestinians without over-reliance on Israeli infrastructure. Is there a place for a localized approach for Palestinian water and agricultural practices? So Nader or Gidon, perhaps, if you wanted to speak to some of those, and then we're going to allow our in-person audience as well to ask some questions.
Again, with the current nature of how things are being done on ground, and because of how we're stuck with the Oslo arrangements, any attempt to improve local water sovereignty and access to water for Palestinians and is very much bound and connected to what is called the Joint Water Committee, at which often it's very challenging to get the approval from the Israeli side to dig new wells or develop new wells. And again, this is much connected to us not being able to reach a final agreement on the allocation of water resources. But adding to that complexity is that also around 64% of the West Bank, if we're talking about the West Bank alone, is recognized as Area C, which is an area that is fully controlled in terms of civil works and military and security affairs by the Israeli military or civil administration. And often any water infrastructure projects, any pipes, storage tanks, wastewater treatment plants are not allowed to be developed in these 64% of the area without the approval from the Israeli civil administration. This is a huge bottleneck for the water sector in Palestine to move forward on developments. What really then needs to be done and recognized, and through our work with EcoPeace, is during this meantime where we're not able to reach a final agreement, where we have the status quo of the occupation and military control, we need to find mechanisms to also hold responsibility, and for Israel to also hold responsibility to take on water development as a basic necessity for the people of Palestine on ground, not from a perspective of goodwill, but also from a perspective of water security in Palestine is also a national security issue that is of the interest of Israel. And again, this turns us back into the issue of we are all in the same boat.
So we're in a lose-lose. The present situation is that there's intermittent water supply. You go to a city like Yatta in the West Bank, south of Hebron, has water supplied by the municipality in the summertime once every 2 months. Imagine living with municipal water supply at such an intermittent fashion. That it's due to the conflict. It's not due.
And they buy water from water tanks, and it's not sustainable. It's very highly priced. So for a family of 6 people, they put nearly their entire household income just on water, which is around $400 a month. This is insane.
On the other side of the coin, it's about 60 million cubic meters of sewage coming mostly from Palestinian sources that are untreated and pollute that shared groundwater that Israel takes the lion's share of until today. So we're in a lose-lose situation. What EcoPeace is proposing, we can turn that into a win-win, not only from an infrastructure perspective, but from a peace perspective, because by enabling Palestinians not to buy more water from Israel, but to directly access groundwater, Palestinians then have a clear interest to treat sewage. And when they have a clear interest to treat sewage, then Israelis too win. And that's the name of the game. It's identifying those win-win solutions that improve the lives of Palestinians and Israelis and meet the urgency. Because it's not as if that the situation is status quo. The situation is that the climate crisis is at our door. The rest of the world is terrified of a 1.5 degree increase in temperatures, of further reductions in rainfall. We've already experienced close to a 2 degree increase in temperature. We've had 15 years of drought in the last 20 years. So time is not on our side, and our appeal to decision makers, our own, but also internationally, is that we need to move forward. And if there's one thing that can bring improvement on the ground, that can build trust, and that can highlight that we have a partner on each side, it's moving forward on water.
Thank you, Gidon. I think that's a good segue point to also turn to our audience for questions. We have mic runners, or we have Caroline over here has the microphone. Ambassador Youssef, Senior Fellow here at USIP.
Well, thank you very much for a very interesting and informative discussion. 2 questions. The first one is in relation to separating water in the negotiations of final status issues, and whether it would be possible, in your view, to persuade the current administration in the US, in light of the success that have been witnessed in the maritime negotiations between Israel and Lebanon, to separate win-win situations from the bigger part of the conflict. So do you think that it is possible to achieve this objective in relation to water as a confidence-building measure between the Israelis and the Palestinians? The second question is in relation to COP. The region has become more interested in COP. We have had one in the last few years in Morocco, this year in Egypt, the following year in the United Arab Emirates, and you mentioned the Abraham Accords several times. Do you think that this debate can be introduced on the international stage through COP that will take place in the United Arab Emirates? Thank you.
Thank you. And do you want to, I can gather a couple of questions and come back, or did you? All right. Let's take that. There were a couple of questions there, so we'll take those 2 questions to start.
So I think the example of Israel and Lebanon, what an achievement to Amos, to the State Department, to this administration. A precedent decision that opens the door. And you're absolutely right. This is the type. So Israel and Lebanon didn't sign a peace treaty, but they understood that time was against them, and that if they didn't move forward, not only could Lebanon fall, but the implications were clearly also on Israel and the broader region. So both governments took, under US leadership, under French leadership here, took that brave step and moved forward and broke the paradigm, because the paradigm for Lebanon too was either there's a peace treaty or there's nothing. So why can't we apply that same principle? The same urgency is there, and the climate crisis brings that urgency. So bringing it to COP, absolutely. We need these issues to come to the Sharm COP in just 2 weeks, but even more so because we have more time to prepare for the COP in the UAE, the Conference of the Parties on Climate, to utilize the climate issue, not just as a threat multiplier, not something that just brings fear to people's hearts, but that can bring hope to people's daily lives. And that's what moving forward on water reflects.
If I may just add to that also, Lucy, I think we do have that opportunity now to influence policy here in the US. Not only to negotiate water as a low-hanging fruit between the Israelis and Palestinians and build that much-needed trust between them, but also to take smaller steps, like our work on the Jordan River and calling on our three governments to come together on signing a memorandum of understanding to prioritize projects that can move forward today, that are much needed, especially on the Jordanian and Palestinian side, like sanitation, like projects related to water infrastructure, also on the Jordanian-Palestinian side. For that trust fund would be a World Bank-managed trust fund that would enable donors to contribute and have these projects implemented. And like I said, they're low-hanging fruits and can move forward tomorrow because they don't need to be, they don't need to agree on the harder political issues of, for instance, water rights. So I think we should be working towards that.
And also to add, I think the mechanisms that we utilize to enable this to happen is also very effective, because at the moment, also with technology and advancement of modeling, we have the opportunity to argue with scientific data and modeling that negotiating of allocating water resources is possible between Palestinians and Israelis. And this is exactly now an exercise that we are conducting with Palestinians and Israeli and international hydrologists to basically optimize water resources with areas of water demand, and to provide this data in the form of technical papers, but also policy papers, to utilize them with our own governments, but also with international community to facilitate this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Neda, and all of you. We had another question down here.
Hello, I'm Dorian from Transoceanic LLC, USA. In a way, I do not agree with the Titanic case. I think nowadays we have to save it, okay? We don't let it die. Going back, I'll tell you about a project that died 20 years ago. It was importing water from Turkey to Israel. And it died because they didn't have the technology at the time. My question is simple. Do you know about the new technologies of importing long-distance water to Israel from Turkey or from other sources? That's one. And how it can be implemented if you know about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are familiar with the different proposals of importing water from, an example, Turkey or other places. And the reason why that didn't take place is because the desalination technology advanced at such speed that the cost of desalination became cheaper than, well, this is not my research, it's the research of the Israeli Water Authority, that the cost of desalinating, so the cost of desalination used to be $2 a cubic meter. The most modern sewage treatment plant in Israel, Sorek 2, it's down to 40 cents a cubic meter, and even the new desalination plants being proposed will probably be even cheaper. And so the cost is a real issue, and there's issues that everyone wants to be producing their water locally or as locally as possible. So this is nothing to do with EcoPeace. The government of Israel and the water authority in Israel decided not to move forward on importing water from Turkey and invested in the desalination. And what we're seeing, particularly in the water energy exchange, is how this can be a game changer. And I think that's the key, because it's not an issue of development. It's not an issue of building, laying pipes and moving water necessarily. It's about creating healthy interdependencies where each side, our conflict is between Israelis, Palestinians, Jordanians. We're, for the very first time, creating a mechanism where every side has something to buy and every side has something to sell. If that sounds familiar, it should remind you of the coal and steel agreement of Europe after World War II. That's how the US helped build the most lasting period of peace in the European continent sort of known. It was about creating that healthy interdependency between coal and steel. Well, what we're doing through the Green-Blue Deal is about creating that healthy interdependency by harnessing the sun and harnessing the sea in a way that each one of us have something of real value to contribute. So let's build on that, and let's include the broader region, including Turkey, in that effort. But it's about creating healthy interdependencies.
Gideon, I'm going to stay with you a second, because you almost mind-read the next question, which is another question from one of our online audience, and one that I've had and we love to ask at USIP, the sort of how we can look at the comparative context here, and how do you compare and contrast the Middle East context with other regions in the world and where this offers possibilities. You just spoke to Europe as an example in the other direction, but where do you see possibilities for expanding this kind of work beyond the Middle East context? And do you ever find yourself contacted by either parallel organizations or others in Africa, elsewhere in Asia, who are wanting to or see that there's something to learn from this example?
Certainly, we've worked for several years with Bosnia and Herzegovina, where we have trained NGOs on local NGOs in that area to adopt our methodology. Similarly, we have been working with NGOs around the Lake Chad on also learning our methodology, the top-down approach, bottom-up approach. And we certainly don't want to add more work.
We have enough to do.
We have enough to do in our own region. We are around 55 staff to 60 staff maximum in all three, in the three offices across the board. So with this little number of people, the level of effort is more than enough to do things on ground in our own countries. But certainly we look into striking partnerships with organizations and think tanks and NGOs, and collaborating with USIP, and being here for this week actually opens really good doors of thinking outside the box on how to transfer this experience from our region and more broadly to other regions of the world. So thank you again. I've failed to thank you like Gideon and Nada and Diana in the first question, but now I have the opportunity to do so.
We're thrilled that you're here with us, and I think, did we see, Cam, were there other questions from the audience? Yes, please, this row here.
Hello, my name is Laila, and you'd spoken a lot about potentially going into the West Bank and Gaza as well in order to bring about more solutions to help them gain access to water. And for some, you view it, I'm wondering what the relationship might be with the final status issue of security, and how you might navigate that with this idea of security in mind, where on one hand the Israelis, they feel the need to have the soldiers there to feel safe, while the Palestinians view it as occupation. How would that go into conversation with this whole issue of water? Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe that I'll just tie that to another question from online, which we had a couple of people actually asking about, speaking to the support or challenges between work at the civil society level here and governments and all these stakeholders that you engage. How does this end up playing out on the ground amid all the sort of political and narrative difficulties that we all know exist in this conflict context?
Start.
Okay, I can start with the first question. It is a very delicate practice, and we're not naive. We don't deny that the occupation is, and the current status is not giving us full potential to advance our work, and is not giving us the full momentum. Because whenever we, in any type of advocacy that we're doing, or any type of, for example, our work on the water energy nexus, our work on the Jordan Valley, every time we try to step one step ahead, the political situation drags us back 10 steps back. And we do some achievements on one side, and then all of a sudden there's a breakout of violence, there's a breakout of a war on Gaza, and everything becomes really difficult to discuss and to achieve and to convince our leadership to actually sit together and make a change on the ground. And for us also as an organization, it's not as easy as it sounds, because with all the great work that we're trying to do, we are still not fully 100% also accepted by our own people. We have this great recognition from international community because they understand that what we're doing is the way forward. But because of the lack of political will, because of the antagonism, because of the reality on the ground, we are often condemned as being normalizers, traitors. I was condemned once, attacked was on social media that I am implementing projects to steal water from Palestinians to sell them to Israeli settlements in the Jordan Valley, which is completely madness. I'm not doing that. I don't want to do that. What we are doing here is really to create an opportunity for everyone to really live in peace and prosperity, and fairly. The occupation is a reality on the ground, but we are a small organization with 50 staff. We cannot solve everything. We're good at environmental peace building. We're good at pushing agendas of improving lives on ground, and we're good at advocacy and speaking to you guys. So whenever we find this linkage of doing things on ground, pushing forward infrastructure and projects and cooperation with the policy level, this is what we're good at. And then this falls on you guys, think tanks like USIP, like people who are well connected to Congress, to State Department, to the Senates, to push forward the agenda of the political advancement on ground through similar work that we're doing today.
Can I just add to that, Lucy? So Nada described the complications of our work. If I was to describe how I function on a daily basis with all the challenges around us, from normalization to working with all the different levels, and the necessity of working with the different levels, or else we will not be able to achieve. Because of the realities on ground, the lack of sustainable development, especially in Jordan and Israel, in Jordan and Palestine. So we have to work with all the different levels. But with all these complications, we're still able to achieve and move forward. Why? Because the messages we put together always highlight the self-interest of the different groups. But for us, it brings the mutual gain for all of us from the work that we're trying to do. So it's a long process. It's a well-planned and strategized process that we go through, but we're able to achieve with highlighting the self-interest and the mutual gain.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. We had one more question here from our audience.
Hello, thank you. My name is Susan. I really thank you, the panelists today, for this wonderful and insightful presentation. I liked the idea that you invited people to go to along the river to see how they might be contributing to the pollution of the river. However, I was wondering, have you tried, because we will talk about top-down and up, down, and down to the top.
Bottom up.
So, yeah, bottom up, yes. I'm using my, yes. So have you tried to invite, especially the leadership, that higher leadership, the policy makers, to also go and experience this, to experience that Palestinians living in Area C have no water for so many months, and they are spending so much money to buy that water, and how the policies that they have put in place are affecting not only, of course, not only the Palestinians, but also the Israelis. I'm not sure about Jordanians because I haven't been there, but so yes. So have you tried to really invite them to that? Just give them a tour, a 1-week tour while they live in those places, and see what that does.
Thank you.
So absolutely. But I think the strength of our work is that we don't have to invite. The mayors that we're working with, who identify the self-interest and the lose-lose of the current situation, they're inviting the ministers, much more powerful than we as an environmental organization. We're creating constituency where middle-level decision makers, such as Nada said, all of the mayors of the Israeli side around Gaza called on the Israeli Prime Minister to recognize that there's not just military security here at stake, and they support the military security issues, but they want it balanced with health security and water security. And it's that engagement with all the different levels of decision makers, with constituency building, that has brought the type of policy changes already into place. They're not enough. And to the first question, to the earlier question as well, we can't solve everything. We're not trying to solve everything. That would be a mistake. But we are trying to show that progress is possible, and that those that think that we can just wait and some miracle will happen or some opportunity will come out of nowhere, have their head in the sand. Time is against us. We need to move forward on what we can move forward now. The example of Lebanon and Israel is such a powerful example that the US administration is responsible for and should be so, and is so proud of. Please repeat that effort. Let's utilize the opportunity to move forward on what is solvable immediately, so that we can improve the situation on the ground, build trust, and that's the foundation for peace building.
Can I just add to that? It's a very important question. I mean, we all spend a lot of our time in the field and taking different levels of decision makers on tours to show them things on ground. But I can really say that EcoPeace is a good example of how things should be done in our region, because we don't only engage as with decision makers and people on ground and make the linkages between them. And I'm talking here all levels of decision makers. So even Knesset members, parliamentarians, we take them on tours because we aim at policy change. But we also take it a step further by piloting projects related to water, energy, food. So on the Jordanian side and the Palestinian side, we're always trying to fundraise for implementing small projects to showcase sustainable development, to showcase the nexus approach. Not only to educate people on ground in the communities, in our country and nationwide, regionally and internationally, but to also bring decision makers to see with their own eyes that the solutions we are doing are the practical, doable solutions that they need to move forward with.
Thank you. Nada, you might have the last word here if there's anything you wanted to add on this point.
No, actually, Gideon and Diana have covered it really well, but I'd really like to thank USIP for this opportunity and for the several set of meetings that you've also prepared for us during this week. And I would just say that anyone who is interested to learn more about our work, please follow our newsletter on our website, spread the word. When you visit the region, knock on our doors. We would love to take you around to show you things in reality, to show you our work, and help us and support us in any way you find suitable.
Thank you. And I know I'm speaking on behalf of our audience here and online to thank you for this discussion today. I think that working at USIP devoted to conflict internationally, we know, right, that in a region that climate can be a driver and exacerbator of existing conflict, and you certainly have plenty, I was going to say fair share, probably unfair share of conflict in your region. But thank you also for laying out those challenges today, but also for showing us and through your work, looking at how it can also be an opportunity perhaps for pushing through those challenges and finding ways to address the conflict through, to use your language, these win-win scenarios. So thank you, and thank you to our audience for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.